Red dust swirled across the landing platform as the transport shuttle touched down at Crimson Spire Academy. David Cole grabbed his single bag and stepped out into the harsh wind of planet Redstone. The air tasted like metal and sand. Around him, towering buildings of dark stone pierced the orange sky like claws reaching upward. 3 figures waited at the platform edge. The largest one made David stop for just a moment. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, covered in golden fur with dark stripes running down its muscular arms. A lion's face with amber eyes stared down at him. This was Vor, the head combat instructor, and he was a Shar. "You are the human?" Vor's voice rumbled like distant thunder. He looked David up and down with obvious disappointment. "You are small." "Average, actually," David said, extending his hand. Vor stared at it like David had offered him a dead fish. The second figure stepped forward, a reptilian creature with green scales and yellow eyes that blinked sideways. "I am Instructor Haas. Welcome to our academy." At least this one seemed polite, though his forked tongue flickered nervously when he spoke. The third was female, insectoid, with 4 arms and compound eyes that reflected the red sunlight. She said nothing, just clicked her mandibles in what David hoped was a greeting and not a threat. "Follow," Vor commanded, turning away without waiting. David shouldered his bag and walked after them. Students lined the corridors they passed through. Young aliens of various species watched him with open curiosity. Most looked predatory. All looked dangerous. A group of younger ones, teenagers by David's guess, whispered loudly enough for him to hear. "That's the new teacher? Looks like prey. No claws, no fangs. Just soft skin. Why would they send something so weak to teach warriors?" David kept his face neutral. He had expected this. Humans were new to the galactic community, only making first contact 15 years ago. Most species still saw them as lucky prey animals who stumbled into advanced technology. Vor led him to a small quarters room with a window overlooking the training grounds. Below, David could see students sparring. A young Shar slammed another student into the ground with enough force to crack the stone. Both got up laughing. "Your first class begins tomorrow at dawn," Vor said. "Try not to get eaten." He left before David could respond. David unpacked his few belongings and studied the information tablet they had given him. His class would consist of 20 students, all from apex predator species. Shar, Krell, and Harv made up most of the roster. Ages ranged from 14 to 17 in Earth years. The file called them cubs, regardless of species. The next morning, David found his classroom in the Western Training Hall. 20 pairs of eyes tracked his movement as he entered. Some were amused. Some were contemptuous. A few looked genuinely curious. "I am David Cole," he began. "I will be teaching advanced combat theory and practical application." A large Krell male in the back row laughed. His scales were deep green with red markings along his spine. "Combat, you?" The others joined in the laughter. "What's your name?" David asked calmly. "Tark, and I could break you with one hand, soft skin?" "Possibly," David agreed. "But combat isn't about breaking. It's about winning." A smaller voice spoke up from the side. "What's the difference?" David turned to see a young Harv, much smaller than the others. Her exoskeleton was lighter in color, almost gray instead of the usual dark blue. "Good question. What's your name?" "Pip." "Well, Pip, breaking something is easy. Winning means achieving your objective. Sometimes that's breaking, sometimes it's not." David walked to the center of the room. "Who here has been in a real fight?" "Life or death?" A few hands went up. A young female Shar with copper-colored fur raised her hand confidently. "I killed a razorhawk on my first hunt," she said with pride. "And what's your name?" "Rin." "Good, tell me, Rin, did you fight the razorhawk with honor? Did you give it a fair chance?" Rin's ears flattened with confusion. "No, I tracked it for 2 days. Waited until it slept. Killed it with 1 strike." "Exactly. You hunted it. That's what real combat is. Not honor. Not fairness. Just winning." David pulled up a hologram display showing various alien anatomies. Every species has weak points. Nerve clusters, joint vulnerabilities, sensory organs that can be exploited. This week we will learn where they are. Tark stood up, his tail thrashing. "This is cowards teaching. Warriors fight with strength, not tricks." "Then you'll die fighting something stronger," David said simply. "Sit down." The room went silent. No one spoke to a Krell like that. Tark's eyes narrowed, and David could see the predator calculating whether to attack. Finally, Tark sat. but his claws remained extended. The class continued with David showing weak points on different species models. Most students looked bored. They wanted to fight to prove themselves, not study diagrams. Only Pip seemed to pay real attention, her compound eyes focusing intently on each lesson. After class, Rin approached David. "Instructor, may I ask a question?" "Of course. You move strangely. Not like prey. You never turn your back to potential threats. You watch everyone constantly." "Why?" David smiled slightly. "Because prey that survives long enough becomes something else." Rin tilted her head, feline confusion crossing her features. "What does that mean?" "It means I'll see you tomorrow, Rin." David left her standing there, puzzled. In the instructor's common room that evening, Vor sat with Haas and 3 other teachers. David entered to get water and heard their conversation stop. "How was your first day, human?" Vor asked, though his tone suggested he didn't really care. "Educational." "Did the cubs eat you alive with their words?" one of the others asked, a gray-scaled Krell named Voss. "Words don't hurt me." Vor leaned forward. "You should quit now, soft skin. Before you embarrass yourself. Before you get hurt during demonstrations. This academy trains the galaxy's finest warriors. We have no room for weakness." David met Vor's amber eyes without flinching. "Good thing I'm not weak then." The room fell silent again. Vor's lips pulled back, showing impressive fangs. But David had already turned away, filling his water container. He could feel their eyes on his back as he left. Let them watch. Let them underestimate. He had been underestimated his entire military career. Humans were good at being underestimated. They had millions of years of practice. 3 weeks passed at Crimson Spire Academy, and David's reputation grew worse instead of better. Students whispered in hallways. Other instructors made jokes during meals. The human who taught combat without fighting. The prey creature who talked about leverage instead of strength. David continued teaching regardless. Every morning, his class of 20 cubs arrived expecting to see real combat demonstrations. Every morning, David showed them diagrams, explained physics, discussed anatomy. He made them practice movement slowly, focusing on precision rather than power. "This is useless," Tark complained during the 4th week. The large Krell had become increasingly aggressive in his dismissal of David's methods. "You teach us to fight like cowards. Where is the honor? Where is the blood?" David stood before the class in the training hall. "Honor is a luxury of the living. Dead warriors have no honor, just graves." "Then show us." Tark stood up, his full 7-foot frame towering over the other students. "Fight me. Prove humans deserve to teach combat. Prove you are not just prey pretending to be predator." The class went completely silent. Even the students who usually ignored David's lessons looked up with interest. A challenge had been issued. In warrior culture across the galaxy, such challenges demanded response. "No," David said simply. Laughter erupted from several students. Tark's scales flushed darker with anger and satisfaction. "See, the soft skin is afraid. I knew it. All humans are cowards hiding behind their weapons and ships. I'm not afraid of you, Tark. I'm afraid for you." "Afraid for me?" Tark stepped closer, his claws extending fully. "Explain. Because if we fight, I'll hurt you. Then you'll learn nothing except that pain exists. You already know that." David turned back to the hologram display. "Sit down." "No." Tark's voice was deadly quiet now. "You will fight me or you will leave this academy." "I will make sure of it. I will tell everyone that human teachers refuse to demonstrate their methods. That they are frauds." David sighed and turned around. "Tark, listen carefully. Combat is not a game. It is not about proving who is stronger. It is about survival. I don't need to prove anything to you." "Coward." Tark spat the word. For the first time, David's expression changed. Something flickered behind his eyes, something cold and old. Class dismissed. Everyone except Tark. The students looked at each other uncertainly. Rin stood slowly. "Instructor, maybe we should leave now." The tone of David's voice made even Rin's predator instincts react. She left quickly, followed by the others. Pip was the last to go, looking back with concern before the door closed. Tark smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Finally. The prey ape shows some spine. Last chance, Tark, walk away." "Make me." What happened next took 3 seconds. David moved forward, not fast, but with perfect efficiency. His hand struck Tark's wrist joint from the side, causing the Krell's claws to spasm open. His other hand grabbed Tark's extended arm and rotated it inward while his foot swept Tark's leg. The large Krell crashed onto his back with David's knee on his chest and his own arm twisted at an angle that made his shoulder joints grind audibly. Tark gasped in shock and pain. He tried to move, but any shift sent agony through his trapped arm. David's face was calm, almost sad. "You are strong, Tark. Probably 3 times stronger than me. You have natural weapons I will never have. In a straight fight, you might win." David's voice was quiet, almost gentle. "But combat is never straight. It is crooked and dirty and unfair. The question is never who is stronger. The question is who understands this better." David released Tark and stood up. The Krell lay there for a moment, breathing hard, his pride more damaged than his body. "Think about what just happened," David said. "Then decide if you want to keep learning or keep posturing." He left Tark on the floor and walked out. In the hallway, he found Pip waiting nervously by the wall. "Is Tark okay?" she asked. "His body is fine. His ego is bruised. He'll survive both." David started walking toward his quarters. Pip followed, her 6 legs clicking softly on the stone floor. "Instructor, why do you teach the way you do? Other teachers make their students fight. They show off their strength. You just talk and show pictures." David stopped walking. He knelt down so he was closer to Pip's height. "Tell me something, Pip. You are smaller than the other students. Weaker by their standards. How do you survive here?" Pip's antennae drooped. "I hide. I avoid conflicts. I am what they call me, the runt." "No, you are smart. You observe. You learn. You adapt." David pointed to his own head. "This is the greatest weapon any species has ever evolved. Everything else is just decoration. But you hurt Tark. You were physical. You used force. I used technique. I used knowledge of how his body works. His strength meant nothing because I did not fight against his strength. I fought around it." David stood back up. "That is what I am trying to teach all of you. Power without knowledge is just noise. Knowledge without wisdom is dangerous. You need all 3. Pip clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. "Will Tark come back to class?" "I don't know. That is his choice." The next day, Tark arrived early to class. His arm was in a medical wrap, though Krell healed quickly. He said nothing, just took his seat and waited. When David began teaching, Tark actually took notes. The other students noticed the change. Whispers spread through the academy. Something had happened between the human and the Krell. No one knew exactly what, but Tark's attitude had completely reversed. Rin approached David after class. "What did you do to Tark?" I answered his question. "What question?" "Whether I could fight." David gathered his teaching materials. He learned that the answer was yes. More importantly, he learned why I did not want to. "I don't understand," David smiled. "You will, Rin. Give it time." That afternoon, new student arrived at the academy. His transport shuttle was expensive, clearly private rather than military. The student who emerged was young, perhaps 15, with luxurious golden fur and an arrogant posture. His name was Kess, son of Ambassador Drawl, one of the most powerful Shar diplomats in the galaxy. Kess walked through the academy like he owned it. Students moved out of his way. Teachers greeted him with careful respect. His father's influence reached far, and no one wanted to anger the ambassador. During the evening meal, David watched Kess select his first target, Pip. The small Harv was eating alone, as usual. Kess walked past her table and deliberately knocked her food tray to the floor. "Watch where you put your things, insect," Kess said loudly. Several students laughed. Pip said nothing, just began cleaning up the spilled food. David stood to intervene, but Rin appeared beside him. "Don't," she said quietly. "Kess is untouchable. His father is too powerful. If you interfere, the ambassador will have you removed from the academy. So I should just watch him bully a student? You should be smart. Pick your battles." Rin's amber eyes met his. "Isn't that what you teach?" David sat back down, but his jaw was tight. Rin was right, tactically speaking. But watching Pip clean up her food while others laughed made something old and angry stir in his chest. Humans had been bullied once, long ago, by bigger predators with sharper teeth. Humans remembered. Humans always remembered. The proving hunt happened twice each year at Crimson Spire Academy. It was tradition older than the academy itself, dating back to when warrior cultures first began training their young. Cubs would be dropped on Talon, Redstone's deadly moon, to survive 3 days hunting dangerous prey. Those who returned with kills earned honor. Those who returned with nothing earned shame. Those who did not return became cautionary tales. David stood in the briefing hall with other instructors while Vor explained the rules to 40 nervous cubs. 2 classes would participate this cycle: David's advanced combat students and instructor Voss's intermediate group. "You will work in teams of 4, Vor announced, his voice carrying authority that made even the boldest students sit straighter. "Each team receives basic supplies, water, medical kit, and 1 emergency beacon. Use the beacon only if death is certain. Using it means failure," David frowned. "Vor, what if a student is seriously injured but not dying? What about extraction procedures?" "Then they endure," Vor said without looking at him. "Pain teaches. Comfort weakens. That's insane. These are children." "These are warriors," Vor corrected. "And you are here as observer only, human. Do not interfere with our traditions." The cubs loaded into transport shuttles. David boarded the instructor shuttle along with Vor, Voss, Haas, and 2 other teachers. They would maintain a distant perimeter, monitoring the cubs through satellite tracking while staying far enough away to let them hunt independently. Talon was beautiful and terrible. Its landscape varied from crystal forests to volcanic plains to deep canyons carved by ancient rivers. It was also home to some of the galaxy's most dangerous megafauna, deliberately stocked to provide worthy challenges for young hunters. The teams dispersed into different regions. David watched their tracking signals spread across his monitor. Pip's team headed toward the northern crystal forests. Rin's team chose the volcanic foothills. Tark's team went straight into the central canyon, seeking the most dangerous prey. Kess had been assigned to Pip's team, along with 2 other students. David had noticed Kess's expression when the assignments were announced: calculating and cruel. The ambassador's son had a plan. The first day passed uneventfully. Teams made successful kills of smaller predators. Some cubs suffered minor injuries. One team triggered their emergency beacon after encountering a rock bear, but they did so early enough that their injuries were not severe. Vor marked them as failures and had them extracted. The second day brought trouble. Pip's team signal began moving erratically in the northern forests. Then 3 of the 4 signals separated, 3 moving southeast, 1 moving deeper north into dangerous territory. "Team 7 has split," Haas observed, pointing at the monitor. "Which signal is alone?" David asked, though he already knew. "The Harv Pip. We need to extract her immediately. That area has spineworm nests." Vor barely glanced at the screen. "If she is alone, she made poor decisions. She will learn or she will die. Either outcome teaches a lesson." "She's a child," David said through clenched teeth. "She is a warrior in training." "This is the training." David stared at Vor for a long moment. Then he looked back at the monitor. Pip's signal was moving steadily northward, deeper into worm territory. The other 3 signals from her team had stopped moving entirely, clustered together several miles to the southeast. "They abandoned her," David said quietly. "They left her there on purpose." "Then she should have been stronger," Voss commented. David's hand moved to the communication panel, but Vor caught his wrist with shocking speed. "You will not interfere. This is not human space. These are not human cubs. We do things our way. Your way gets children killed. Yes, sometimes it does. That is acceptable." David pulled his hand free. He walked to the equipment locker and began pulling out survival gear. Breather mask, medical supplies, a tracking pad linked to Pip's signal. "What are you doing?" Vor demanded, going after her. "No, you are not. That is an order." David turned to face Vor. The massive Shar stood between him and the shuttle exit, 8 feet of muscle and predatory intent. Behind Vor, the other instructors watched with varied expressions, some uncomfortable, some curious, all uncertain. "Move," David said. "No." What happened next occurred too fast for most of the instructors to fully process. David's hand shot forward, striking Vor's throat at a precise point that paralyzed his vocal cords temporarily. As Vor gagged silently, David's other hand struck behind Vor's knee, buckling the leg. The massive instructor dropped to one knee, and David's elbow cracked across his temple, not hard enough to cause serious damage but hard enough to stun. Vor collapsed, conscious but disoriented. The other instructors stared in shock. David grabbed a hoverbike from the storage bay. "Stop him," Voss shouted, but no one moved. They had all just watched a human drop their strongest instructor in under 3 seconds. No one wanted to be next. David activated the hoverbike and shot out of the shuttle bay, heading north toward Pip's signal. Behind him, he heard Vor's voice returning, roaring with rage. It did not matter. By the time they organized pursuit, David would be too far ahead to stop. The crystal forests of northern Talon were gorgeous and deadly. Massive crystals grew like trees, refracting light into rainbow patterns. Between them, the ground was soft and treacherous, hiding sinkholes and burrows. David followed Pip's signal, his hoverbike weaving between crystal pillars. He found Pip's equipment pack first, torn and scattered across the ground. Signs of struggle. Then he found Pip herself, pressed against the base of a huge crystal formation, trying to make herself invisible. Her exoskeleton was cracked in several places, leaking clear fluid. One of her 6 legs was bent at a wrong angle. "Pip," David called out, slowing the hoverbike. She turned toward him, her compound eyes reflecting relief and fear. "Instructor, you should not be here. There is a spine worm. It is hunting me." "I know. Can you move?" "Not fast enough. It is old, large, it is playing with me. It likes the chase." Pip's voice was surprisingly calm despite her injuries. "Cass did this. He broke my supplies. He told the others I had used the emergency beacon and been marked as failure. They left me behind. When I realized what he had done, I was already too far into worm territory." David felt cold anger settle into his gut. "We'll deal with Cass later. Right now we need to leave. It is too late." Pip pointed behind David. He turned and saw it. The spine worm was enormous, at least 60 feet long and covered in overlapping black plates. Hundreds of spine-like protrusions jutted from its back, each one dripping with acidic venom. Its head was eyeless but covered in sensory organs that twitched and pulsed. The mouth opened, revealing 3 circular rows of teeth designed to grip and crush. The worm had been hunting Pip, playing with her, probably for hours. Now it saw David and recognized bigger prey, better prey. "Get on the bike," David said calmly, not taking his eyes off the worm. "It is too fast. We cannot outrun it." "I know. Then why did you come?" David smiled, though there was no humor in it. "Because no one else would." The spine worm coiled, preparing to strike. David positioned himself between the creature and Pip. His hands were steady. His breathing was controlled. Every muscle in his body relaxed into readiness. The worm struck like lightning. David moved like water. The fight began. The spine worm's first strike would have killed most creatures. Its massive head shot forward with enough force to shatter crystal. David was not there. He had already moved 3 feet to the left, his body flowing around the attack with minimal effort. Pip watched from behind the crystal formation, her injuries forgotten in sheer disbelief. The human was fighting a spine worm. Spine worms killed trained adult warriors. They killed hunting parties. They killed armored vehicles. This was a creature that survived by being unkillable. Yet David moved through its attacks like smoke through claws. The worm struck again, its tail whipping around to catch David from behind. He dropped flat, letting the spiked appendage pass over him by inches. Acid dripped from the spines and sizzled where it hit the ground. None touched David. The worm learned quickly, as apex predators do. It began attacking from multiple angles, using its coiled body to cut off escape routes. Its sensory organs tracked David's movements, predicting his path. It should have worked, but David was not escaping. He was positioning. Pip saw it happen in slow motion. The worm lunged, mouth open wide. David rolled forward instead of away, sliding under the creature's throat. His hand struck out, fingers rigid, hitting a spot behind the worm's jaw where nerves clustered. The creature's head snapped sideways involuntarily, slamming into a crystal pillar. The crystal shattered. So did several of the worm's facial sensors. It recoiled, screeching in pain and confusion. "Instructor!" Pip screamed. "Its blood is acid." Black fluid sprayed from the worm's wounds. David was already moving, predicting each trajectory. The acid splashed across the ground behind him, in front of him, to his sides. None touched him. He ran toward the worm, not away from it. The worm struck downward, trying to crush this impossible prey. David grabbed one of its smaller spines, using the creature's own momentum to swing himself onto its back. The worm thrashed violently. Any normal creature would have been thrown immediately or impaled on the larger spines. David moved along the worm's back like he was reading a map. His hands found specific points between armor plates, striking with surgical precision. Each blow targeted nerve clusters, making sections of the worm's body spasm and weaken. He was not trying to kill it. He was trying to control it. The worm slammed its body against crystal formations, trying to crush the thing on its back. David jumped clear before each impact landed and immediately repositioned. He grabbed the worm's sensory organs, pulling them in directions they were not meant to bend. The creature screamed, a sound that made Pip's exoskeleton vibrate painfully. Pip had never seen anything like this. David's face was completely calm. No rage, no fear, no excitement. Just focus. The focus of a predator that had hunted for so long that violence became mechanical, efficient, boring. The worm tried a new tactic. It coiled around David, attempting to constrict and crush him like a snake. Its acid-coated spines pressed inward. David dropped to the ground and rolled to the side, but not fast enough. One spine grazed his left shoulder, tearing cloth and skin. Acid burned into the wound. David's expression did not change. He shifted his stance slightly to compensate for the injury and continued moving. He is not even slowing down, Pip whispered to herself. He is hurt but not slowing down. The fight lasted 7 minutes. To Pip it felt like hours. The spine worm was the most dangerous predator on Talon. It had killed hundreds of prey animals and dozens of trained hunters. It had never encountered something like David. Every attack the worm made was avoided or redirected. Every time it tried to use its size advantage, David turned that size into liability, making the creature hurt itself against the environment. When it tried to retreat, David cut off escape routes with thrown debris and strategic positioning. Finally, the Y-worm stopped attacking. It coiled defensively, its remaining sensory organs fixed on David, and made a sound Pip had never heard from a spine worm before. Submission. Fear. David stood 20 feet away, breathing hard but steady. Blood ran down his left arm from the acid burn. Cuts covered his face and hands from near misses with spines. His clothes were shredded, but he was standing, and the worm was backing away. Go, David said quietly to the creature. Hunt something else. The spine worm retreated slowly, never turning its eyeless face from David. When it was 50 feet away, it suddenly turned and fled, crashing through crystal formations in its haste to escape. The forest fell silent. David walked back to where Pip huddled against the crystal base. He knelt down carefully, his injured shoulder making him wince for the first time. Are you okay to move? He asked, his voice gentle despite what had just happened. Yes, but you... What are you? David helped Pip onto the hoverbike, securing her broken leg. I'm patient. That's all. Patience beats fury every time. That was not patience. That was... Pip struggled for words. That was Apex. That was what we all pretend to be. You fought like the ancient ones from my people's legends. The ones we tell stories about to scare hatchlings. David activated the hoverbike. Your legends probably describe persistence hunters. Predators that follow prey until it collapses from exhaustion. Predators that can take massive damage and keep moving. Predators that use intelligence instead of strength. He paused. Humans are persistence hunters, Pip. We evolved that way. We're designed for it. I do not understand. You will. Let's get you medical attention first. They flew back toward the instructor camp. David's communicator had been smashed during the fight, but he still had the tracking beacon. As they approached, he could see multiple shuttles in the air. Vor had sent search parties. The hoverbike touched down at the camp. Vor rushed forward, his face a mixture of rage and confusion. Other instructors followed. Behind them, several cubs had returned early from their hunts, drawn by the emergency signals. Rin was among them. Tark. Even Kess stood at the back, looking nervous. You struck a superior officer, Vor growled at David. You disobeyed direct orders. He stopped, seeing Pip's injuries. Then he saw David's wounds. The acid burns, the cuts, the blood. What happened? Spine worm, David said simply, helping Pip off the bike. Pip needs medical attention. Her team abandoned her in worm territory deliberately. All eyes turned to Kess. The golden-furred cub tried to maintain his arrogant posture but failed under the weight of so many stares. I did not. She was weak. She fell behind. We thought you sabotaged her equipment, David interrupted. You lied to the other team members. You left her to die. Prove it, Kess spat back. We will investigate, Vor said, but his voice had lost its certainty. He was still staring at David. You fought a spine worm? Yes, impossible. Spine worms kill everything. Not everything. David sat down heavily, exhaustion finally showing. Vor, we need to change the emergency extraction protocols. No student should be put in a situation where calling for help means failure. That policy almost killed Pip. It would have killed her if I had followed your orders. Vor said nothing for a long moment. The other instructors whispered among themselves. The cubs watched David with expressions of shock and something else, the beginning of understanding. Rin stepped forward. Her voice was quiet but clear. Instructor David, I saw the worm flee. Through my binoculars before you returned. I saw it run away. Spine worms do not run. They are apex predators. They fear nothing. She paused, her amber eyes locked on David. What are you? David met her gaze. A teacher. That's all. Just a teacher who remembers being prey once a very long time ago. No. Rin shook her head slowly. You are what we all pretend to be when we sharpen our claws and practice our roars. You are what we fear in the dark. David smiled sadly. Then maybe that's the lesson, Rin. The scariest things don't roar. They smile and keep walking forward. Security footage changed everything. The Academy's automated surveillance drones had captured the entire fight between David and the spine worm. By the time the shuttles returned to Crimson Spire Academy, the video had already spread through the student network. By morning, it had reached the wider galactic network. David woke in the medical bay to find his room surrounded by security guards. Not Academy guards, Galactic Council guards. Their presence made the situation clear. This was now bigger than a training accident. Dr. Lin, the human medical officer stationed at the Academy, checked David's wounds with professional efficiency. The acid burns are healing. You're lucky the exposure was brief. Unlucky that you were exposed at all. What were you thinking? I was thinking a student needed help, David said, testing his bandaged shoulder. Noble. Stupid but noble. Lin lowered his voice. You know they're calling you the Walker now? The student started it. It's spreading across the networks. Do you know what that means to most species? No. The Walker is an old legend. Appears in dozens of different cultures. It's the predator that never stops coming. That follows prey for days, weeks, across any terrain, through any danger. Most species thought it was just mythology. Lin met David's eyes. You made it real. 2 council members arrived that afternoon. Administrator Quill, a dignified avian with silver feathers, and Security Director Prax, a heavy-set reptilian with calculating eyes. They dismissed the guards and closed the door. Instructor Cole, Quill began, her voice carefully neutral. We need to discuss what happened on Talon. I rescued a student. You assaulted a superior officer, violated direct orders, and engaged a Class 5 predator in single combat. Prax pulled up a hologram displaying the fight footage. This video has been viewed 800 million times in the last 20 hours. It has caused significant concern among council members. David watched the hologram replay his fight with the worm. From this angle, he could see what others saw. A human, supposedly weak and prey-like, dismantling an apex predator with surgical precision. No wonder people were scared. Concern about what exactly? David asked. About what humans are, Quill said bluntly. The galaxy has been treating your species as technological opportunists. Smart prey that got lucky with tool development. This footage suggests something very different. Prax gestured and the hologram shifted to show data displays. Our xenobiologists have been reviewing human evolution. The analysis is disturbing. Humans are persistence hunters. Your bodies are designed for endurance beyond any known species. You can run for hours without stopping. You can survive injuries that would kill most creatures. Your brains are structured for tracking and prediction across enormous timescales. We've been apex predators since before we left Earth. Quill added quietly. We just didn't recognize it because you don't look the part. David stayed silent. What could he say? They were right. Ambassador Drahl has filed formal complaints, Prax continued. His son Kess claims you threatened him. Claims you struck Instructor Vor without provocation. Claims the entire incident was orchestrated to make humans look superior. That's absurd, David said flatly. Kess sabotaged Pip's equipment and left her to die. I have Pip's testimony and physical evidence. We know. Quill's feathers ruffled with displeasure. We've reviewed everything. Kess is clearly guilty. But his father is powerful and protective. This is becoming political rather than practical. There was a knock at the door. Vor entered, his movement stiff and formal. The massive Shar looked uncomfortable, which was saying something. Administrator, Director, Instructor Cole. Vor nodded to each. I have come to make a statement. Speak, Quill said. I was wrong. The words clearly cost Vor considerable pride. My policies regarding emergency extraction were flawed. My refusal to allow David to rescue the Harv cub was wrong. My treatment of human capabilities was based on prejudice rather than fact. He turned to David. You are a better warrior than I am. You are a better teacher than I am. I challenged you. I dismissed you. You responded by saving a student's life at great personal risk. For this I apologize. The room fell silent. A formal apology from someone of Vor's status was rare and meaningful. David stood carefully, his shoulder still healing, and extended his hand. Vor stared at it for a moment, then gripped it carefully, his massive hand engulfing David's. I respect your traditions, David said, but some traditions need to change. We can honor warrior culture without sacrificing students unnecessarily. Agreed. Vor released David's hand. The council should know that every combat instructor in this academy has reviewed the footage of David's fight. We have reached consensus. Humans should lead advanced combat training across all council academies. Their methods are superior to our traditional approaches. Prax and Quill exchanged glances. That's a significant recommendation, Prax said. It is an obvious one, Vor replied. Watch the footage again. David did not rely on strength, on natural weapons, on size. He relied on knowledge, patience, and precision. These are skills that can be taught. These are skills our students need. Over the following days, David's students became his most vocal defenders. Rin organized testimony sessions. Tark, who had once challenged David's teaching, now spoke passionately about the difference between fighting like a warrior and winning like a hunter. Even students from other classes came forward to discuss how David's methods had changed their thinking. Pip recovered quickly, her exoskeleton healing with medical assistance. She gave the most damaging testimony against Kess, detailing exactly how he had sabotaged her equipment and misled the other team members. The evidence was overwhelming. Kess was expelled. Ambassador Drawl threatened legal action, diplomatic consequences, even trade sanctions. But public opinion had shifted dramatically. The footage of David fighting the spine worm, combined with Kess's obvious guilt, made the ambassador's position untenable. Eventually, he withdrew his complaints and removed Kess from the academy quietly. But Drawl had one final card to play. He filed a formal challenge to David's actions, claiming excessive force against Instructor Vor. By galactic law, striking a superior officer required review by the Academy Tribunal. If found guilty, David would be banned from teaching and possibly imprisoned. The tribunal hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks after the incident. David spent the time continuing to teach, though now his classes were packed with observers. Other instructors sat in on lessons. Students from across the academy requested transfers to his courses. The Cubs no longer called him Softskin or Prey Ape. They called him Instructor, or Walker, or simply David with respect in their voices. On the day of the tribunal, David entered the hearing chamber to find it packed. Students lined the walls. Instructors filled the observation galleries. The tribunal consisted of 5 judges from different species, chosen for their impartiality. The lead judge, a crystalline being named Shale, reviewed the charges. Instructor David Cole, you are accused of assaulting Superior Officer Vor without lawful cause, violating direct orders, and recklessly endangering yourself and others. How do you plead? Guilty to all charges, David said calmly. And I would do it again. The room erupted in whispers. Ambassador Drawl, watching from the diplomatic section, smiled with satisfaction. But David was not finished. I violated orders because those orders would have resulted in a student's death. I struck Vor because he physically prevented me from saving that student. I endangered myself because no one else would. David turned to face the judges directly. If following orders means watching children die, then I will break those orders every time. If respecting rank means abandoning my responsibility as a teacher, then I will disrespect that rank. Court-martial me if you must, but know that I will never regret choosing a student's life over protocol. Shale's crystalline face reflected light and patterns that suggested deep thought. You understand that your actions undermine military discipline? I understand that military discipline serves warriors, not the other way around. When protocol becomes more important than the people we are supposed to protect, that protocol is broken. Strong words, another judge commented. Do you have anyone who will speak on your behalf? I will. Vor stood from the instructor section. I will speak for him. One by one, others stood, Hass, Voss. And then the students began standing, Rin, Tark, Pip, supported by 2 other cubs because her leg was still healing. Within moments, nearly everyone in the chamber was standing. Shale looked across the room, his crystalline form chiming softly. I see. Perhaps we should hear some testimony before proceeding with judgment. The tribunal took 3 days to hear all testimony. Instructors explained how David's teaching methods had improved student performance across multiple metrics. Medical staff testified that injuries in David's classes had decreased by 60% compared to traditional combat training. Students described how learning to think tactically had saved their lives during the proving hunt. Pip's testimony was the most powerful. She stood before the judges, her voice clear despite her obvious nervousness. Instructor David taught me something no other teacher ever did. He taught me that being small does not mean being weak. That being different does not mean being less. He showed me that the greatest weapon any warrior has is not claws or fangs, but the mind. She paused, looking directly at the judges. Then he proved it by fighting something none of us could fight. Not to show off, not to prove himself, but to save me, because that is what real teachers do. On the 3rd day, the judges called for final statements. Ambassador Drawl spoke first, his golden fur perfectly groomed, his voice dripping with diplomatic polish. The law is clear. Striking a superior officer is a crime regardless of motivation. If we allow emotion to override discipline, chaos follows. Instructor Cole's actions, while perhaps well-intentioned, cannot be excused. The law must be upheld. Then it was David's turn. He stood before the judges, still wearing bandages on his left shoulder, and spoke without notes. I came to Crimson Spire Academy to teach, not to make friends, not to prove humans are superior, just to teach. I taught what I know, that intelligence beats instinct, that patience beats fury, that knowledge beats strength. David looked around the chamber. But I learned something too. I learned that warrior culture at its best is about protecting others, about sacrifice, about standing between danger and those who cannot protect themselves. That is not human culture. That is not Shar culture or Krell culture or any single species culture. That is universal. He turned back to the judges. You ask if I would do it again? Yes. Every time. Because the moment we value protocol more than life, we stop being warriors. We become something else. Something worse. The judges deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, Shale spoke for the tribunal. We find Instructor David Cole guilty of violating orders and assaulting a superior officer. However, we also find that circumstances warranted these actions. Officer Vor's orders were unlawful as they endangered a student's life without justification. Instructor Cole's response, while technically criminal, was morally correct. Ambassador Drawl stood angrily. This is outrageous. The law, Shale interrupted, his crystalline voice ringing with authority, serves justice, not the other way around. Instructor Cole is found guilty but with no punishment. His record will show the violation, but also show it was justified. This case is closed, Drawl stormed out. The chamber erupted in cheers from the students. David simply nodded his thanks to the judges and left quietly. 2 weeks later, David stood in front of his class for what he knew might be his last lesson. Despite the tribunal's ruling, he had submitted his resignation. The controversy had been too great. He did not want his presence to cause further problems for the academy. The Cubs did not know he was leaving. Rin had brought fresh recording equipment, wanting to capture David's lessons for study. Tark had finally mastered the joint manipulation techniques David had been teaching. Even students from other classes crowded the doorway, hoping to observe. Today we talk about human evolution, David began, about why humans fight the way we do. He pulled up a hologram of Earth, rotating slowly in the display. 4 million years ago, my ancestors were small apes living in trees. We had no claws, no fangs, no armor. We were food for everything bigger than us. Most species in that position would have evolved physical weapons. Humans evolved something else. The hologram shifted, showing primitive humans walking across grasslands. We learned to walk on 2 legs, freeing our hands to make tools. We learned to sweat, allowing us to run for hours without overheating. We learned to track prey across vast distances, reading signs in dirt and broken plants. We learned to predict animal behavior, to understand migration patterns, to plan ambushes days in advance. Another shift, humans hunting a large animal. We hunted megafauna, creatures 10 times our size. We followed them for days, weeks. We did not try to fight them directly. We followed until they collapsed from exhaustion, until they were too tired to run anymore. Then we moved in for the kill. Tark raised his hand. That seems cruel, long and painful for the prey. It was. It is. David met Tark's eyes. Nature is not kind. Evolution does not care about mercy. It only cares about survival. Humans survived by being the most persistent, most patient, most relentless predators on Earth. By the time we developed agriculture, we had already hunted dozens of megafauna species to extinction. The hologram showed human brain development, the growth of the frontal cortex over millions of years. Our brains grew larger to handle tracking and planning. We developed language to coordinate hunts. We created art and music because pattern recognition was so crucial to our survival. Everything humans became, we became because we were predators who hunted with our minds. Rin leaned forward. Is that why you fight the way you do? Why you do not rely on strength? Exactly. I cannot overpower a spine worm. I cannot outrun it. But I can outlast it. I can predict its movements. I can use its own strength against it. I can survive its attacks and keep fighting. That is what humans do. We endure. Pip clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. So humans are apex predators because you refuse to stop? In simple terms, yes. Humans are terrifying not because of what we can do in a moment, but because of what we will do over time. We will follow. We will adapt. We will learn. We will never, ever give up. David smiled slightly. That is why I teach patience and knowledge over strength and fury. Because strength fails, fury exhausts itself. But knowledge and patience, those never run out. The class sat in silence, processing this. Finally, Tark spoke again. When you fought the spine worm, you were not angry. You were not scared. You were just doing it. Because that is what persistence hunters do. Emotion is expensive. It burns energy. When you hunt for days, you cannot afford emotion. You just walk. You just move. You conserve everything for the final moment when it matters. David paused. The spine worm expected fury or fear. It got neither. It got a predator older and more patient than itself. So it ran. And if it had not run? Rin asked. Then I would have kept fighting until one of us could not continue. That is the difference between burst predators and persistence predators. You fight until you win or until you are too tired to fight. Humans fight until we win or until we are dead. There is no middle ground for us. That is why we are dangerous. The lesson continued for another hour. David explained human history, human wars, human exploration. He explained how humans went from prey apes to spacefaring civilization in a geological eye blink. How they explored every environment on Earth from polar ice to deep deserts. How they survived and thrived through sheer stubbornness. When the lesson ended, David began packing his materials. This is my last class, he said quietly. I am leaving the academy. The reaction was immediate and loud. Students shouted protests. Rin stood up so quickly her chair fell backward. You cannot leave. You are the best teacher here. I am also the most controversial. My presence causes problems. Ambassador Drawl has filed additional complaints. Other diplomatic families are nervous about human instructors. It is better if I go. No, Tark said firmly. The large Krell walked to the front of the room. We will not allow it. It is not your decision, David said gently. Then we will make it our decision. Tark looked at the other students. Who agrees that Instructor David should stay? Every hand went up. Every single one. 2 hours later, a formal petition arrived at the Academy Administrator's office. It contained signatures from 347 students, 22 instructors, and 16 staff members. All demanding that David be given a permanent position. All threatening to transfer to other academies if he left. Vor personally delivered the petition to Administrator Quill. You cannot let him go, Vor said bluntly. He has changed this academy in 2 months. Students are thinking instead of just fighting. Injury rates are down. Combat effectiveness is up. More importantly, he has shown us that strength is not enough. We need him. Quill read through the petition carefully. Ambassador Drawl will be furious. Let him be furious. The cubs have spoken. The instructors have spoken. Even I have spoken, and I was his harshest critic. Vor leaned forward. Quill, David Cole represents something the galaxy needs to understand. Humans are not weak. They are not prey. They are apex predators who hunt with their minds. We can fear that or we can learn from it. I choose to learn. That evening, David received a message requesting his presence in the administrator's office. He arrived expecting to sign final resignation papers. Instead, he found Quill, Vor, and a holographic projection of 3 Galactic Council members. "Instructor Cole," Quill began, "your resignation has been rejected." David blinked. "I do not understand." "We are offering you a new position," one of the council members said. "Director of Advanced Combat Studies for all council academies. You will develop curriculum based on human persistence hunting strategies. You will train instructors across the galaxy. You will help us rethink how we approach warfare and combat." "This is—" "I am not sure I am qualified for such a position." "You fought a spine worm and won," Vor said flatly. "You reformed this academy in 2 months. You have 347 students and 22 instructors willing to quit if you leave. I think you are qualified." David was silent for a long moment. "On one condition. We reform the proving hunt protocols. No more forcing students to choose between calling for help and being marked as failures." "Agreed," Quill said immediately. "The protocols will be rewritten under your supervision." "Then I accept." 3 months later, David stood in the same classroom, but now it was packed with instructors from 15 different academies. They had come to learn human combat theory, to understand persistence hunting, to change how the galaxy thought about warfare. Rin, Tark, and Pip sat in the front row as teaching assistants. They would help demonstrate techniques. They would share their experiences learning from David. They had become teachers themselves. Outside the window, new students arrived for the term. David watched them walk across the red sand of Crimson Spire Academy. Some were large and intimidating. Some were small and nervous. All were cubs trying to become warriors. They would learn, as David's first class had learned, that being a warrior was not about size or strength or natural weapons. It was about knowing when to fight and when to walk away, when to use force and when to use patience, when to roar and when to whisper. They would learn that the most dangerous predator in any room was not the one with the biggest claws. It was the one who smiled, stayed calm, and refused to give up. They would learn what it meant to be human in a galaxy full of apex predators. They would learn to be patient,